Hey everybody, hope everybody's doing well. Welcome back to the channel. I want to thank everybody for all the comments and feedback from my last few videos. That's what prompted me to do this video, is a lot of the questions and comments and some of the things you guys commented on in the last couple of videos I've made on river fishing. So today I'm going to kind of keep that whole deal going, and we're going to go over some more river fishing stuff. Thanks to everyone that subscribed to the channel. If you haven't subscribed, I would ask that you would consider it. That way you'll be notified every time a new video comes out. And if for some reason the content changes in some way that you aren't liking what you're watching, you can always unsubscribe. So just keep that in mind. I would ask that if you haven't subscribed, at least consider it. Helps the channel. And, obviously I'm trying to get the channel to continue to grow. It has done actually much better than what I expected. So hopefully we can keep that kind of momentum rolling. River fishing is something that I've done pretty much all throughout the time I've been bass fishing. I've had a lot of success tournament-wise in rivers, and that by all means don't take that as me saying I'm a river expert, because I'm not. I've just had more success in rivers, and I think that's because river fish tend to live shallower, and I'm a shallow water fisherman, so they kind of go hand in hand. Today I'm going to share 10 things with you, 10 tips that I think will help you catch more river bass. Some of these will apply to, if you have a boat, if you have a kayak, they can apply to you. And some of them can even apply if you're just somebody who doesn't have a boat but have a stream or river close by that you walk the banks and fish. Just little things to keep in mind. And I jotted them down just because I wanted to make sure I didn't leave anything out. But I got 10 things, 10 tips to help you catch more river bass. The first one is current is a big key to river bass. Most times bass seek it out because it brings their forage, their food to them. They can position on objects, hard cover, and allow the food or the forage to be washed by the current, and all they have to do is pretty much jump out, grab it, and then tuck back in behind where they were sitting. They feed by it, and most of the time bass will stay in current. A river bass is used to current, whether you have a tidal system or you just have a river system that goes up and down according to how much rain you get. A lot of times in a river of bass, a lot of their feeding habits tend to revolve around current. Not always, but most of the time. In a river system, most of the time you're always going to have fluctuating water, and in tidal systems you will have a lot of current just because the tide constantly goes up and down throughout the day. The one time I would say they probably don't really look to get out of the current for the most part is in the spring when they're trying to spawn. They probably look for slack water areas more then, because it's easier to spawn and it helps the eggs stay, down in the nest, and there's not a lot of current rushing through and going through the area that they're spawning in. So I think in the spring maybe they will look more for slack water areas. The stronger the current, that was tip number one, is the current. Second tip, along the same lines as current, is the stronger the current is, the more likely I'm going to use a moving bait, a cranking bait, something where you're always turning your reel handle, whether it be a small crankbait, a bladed jig, a spinner bait, maybe even a swim jig. The faster the current and the stronger the current, the more I'm going to use moving baits. It's just more of a natural presentation with the current moving by. It's what the fish are used to seeing, and they're used to being able, like I said before, tuck down behind cover, and when something swims by or gets washed by, they can reach out, get their meal, and they can get back into the cover they were sitting in and wait for the next opportunity to come by. And slack current is when I'll go more to your plastics, your jigs, and again, just little crawl type baits, your worms. That's what I'll use in the backwater, slower current times when the rivers are low, when you have to really slow down and pick stuff apart. You'll go more to your plastics and that kind of thing. Tip number 3, always take note of how fish are positioning on the cover. Especially in strong current or any kind of current. The way a fish positions in a river on cover, you can eliminate a lot of wasted time, because if you catch a fish, we'll just say you catch a fish off a laydown on a crankbait, and I know because I've seen this so many times. A lot of times you're going to see that strike, especially if you're fishing, say, 3-4 foot of water. If you're able to see how that fish comes off the cover and attacks and eats your bait, next time you come to a similar piece of cover, you run your bait along the same angle and try to bring it across that cover in the same way. A lot of times you'll be surprised that they will position, it's almost like a pattern. They'll position a certain way on cover, and you can run your bait through at the right angle or across the cover the right way, and you'll get a strike. So always take note once you get a bite, whether you're fishing on the bank or out of your boat or a kayak or whatever you may be doing. Once you get your first strike, pay close attention to how that fish ate your lure or how it bit your lure, because that's important. Number 4, a lot of times in rivers, the forage, the bait is smaller. Now, that's not to say some days you can't put on a big ribbon tail worm, because I have, and catch fish with it. But most of the time, not all the time, most instances, a smaller bait is going to get you more bites in a river. And now what I'll try and do is I'll usually, especially if I'm fishing in a tournament, a derby, is I will try to get my limit fishing smaller stuff and get 5 fish, and then I will switch over to maybe a bigger crankbait or a bigger plastic worm or a bigger topwater or something. But a lot of your fish are used to feeding on smaller forage in a river. And, like a small, say for plastics, this is a real good river bait. This is just a small beaver type. And this is like a 3.5 inch, That's a real good bait in the river, is a little beaver style bait. Real small jig, a 1/4 ounce jig is a good river choice. You just want to try to keep your bait like the forage that you're fishing for. To give you an idea, this is like a 1.0 square bill, and I think I still have one up here from the other day when I did it. And this is a 1.5, so you can see the difference in the size of the 1.5 and the 1.0. So you want to try to use smaller, downsizing your baits when you're fishing in a river. Number 6, whenever you can find them, and sometimes that's hard to do, but whenever you can find them, try to use maps. Now, let me say this: if you have electronics on your boat or kayak, or if you're fortunate enough to have something like that you fish out of, the mapping now is probably better than it's ever been. I recently added a Garmin unit to my boat, just because the mapping is so much better than the Lowrance units that I had. So mapping is a big deal in the river. A lot of times river mapping is not the greatest, but with this Garmin unit I have, it's pretty much spot on, and it lets you know that when you're running a river, you can hopefully depend on the fact that you're not going to run up on something that's going to tear your mess up. So, but if you aren't someone with that kind of, mapping or electronics on your boat, I still look at these all the time. I mean, these maps, you can get them for a lot of the rivers, the bigger rivers. Like this is the Chick, Potomac, James River. You can get them for places like that. And this is even like the Mahern River and Nottoway River, back where I used to live. And those kind of maps at least give you a layout of what everything looks like. And they're helpful. They'll help you find backwater areas. They'll help you find little cuts and ditches that you may not have known were there. And stuff like that is those little hidden spots like that in a river, man. I can't tell you, there's been several times where you go on a backwater. There's two reasons why you want to find backwaters when you're looking at a river. The first reason is ultimately at some point there's going to be super high water in the river that you like to fish. You may fish a river close to your house and maybe where you spend just about every one of your fishing trips to the same river. When the river gets high, that water rises, those fish go back as far as that water will let them go. And that makes them a lot tougher to get to and a lot tougher to catch. One thing you can look for when you're looking at a map for a backwater area on a river is look for a backwater area that dead ends. I can't tell you how many times I've been to the back of a cut or a ditch or a backwater area, and for whatever the reason, the river, it stops. It doesn't spread out and open up and go back into the woods, into a swamp. It just dead ends. And when that main river gets muddy, those fish will go back into the back of that backwater area or that ditch, whatever you want to call it. And if that water is just a little clear, they will stack up back there and you can catch the daylights out of them. I've seen it over and over and over again at times where you can go into the back of an area like that and the fish are just stacked back there, and especially if there's bait. They will go back there and they will stay until that main river gets in better shape. It's not as turbid, not as muddy, not as dirty. A backwater area at times like that can be the place to be. So that's another reason to look at maps. And another thing you can do if you don't have electronics and you can't get your hands on one of these is something I started doing a few years back, and that's get on your old computer, laptop, whatever you got, and go on Google Earth. And you can look at any river you want. And it'll show you anything and everything you want to see. So there's ways around if you don't have electronics on a kayak or you don't have the best mapping on your boat, or if it's just somebody that walks a river, there's ways to be able to explore and get a layout of where you're going, no matter how you go about doing your fishing. So maps was actually number 6. Using Google Earth, that was number 7. And I'm sorry I jotted these down, but I didn't want to forget anything. And I just was kind of been sitting around for the last 2 or 3 days based on comments and stuff, trying to figure out, the best way to do this and not forget anything. So, one more thing about backwaters. When you're fishing backwater areas, a lot of times you don't have a lot of current, especially if it is one that dead ends. Now, some of these backwater areas, they'll go back and it'll go back into a swamp, or they'll just go back and there's still going to be a little current back there. Look for little ditches and cuts in between. Say you got two big cypress trees and you got a place where the water runs and goes up into the swamp. It's like a little ditch there. Look for that stuff, because those fish will position right at the mouth of that little cut, just like they would at the mouth of a creek. Anywhere they can ambush something, a river fish, river bass is different than a lake bass. Now, I ain't saying lake bass don't ambush, because they do, but sometimes they do it differently. A river bass spends his whole life setting with his nose in current, most of the time. Not all of them, because some rivers are different. Some rivers move more than others, and I get that. But he adapts to the way he has to eat. And the way he eats is he sets in that current, and he waits for stuff to swim by or get pushed by to him, where he can easily reach out and grab it and expend as little energy as he's got to. So keep that in mind anytime you're fishing anywhere, but especially in rivers. Those fish are conditioned to that. On a tidal river, number 9, that was number 8. And I'm sorry if if you got questions about anything I'm going over, obviously you guys always ask, so that's fine. I'll answer them. I always try to answer and reply to every comment. I think to this point I've replied to everyone I've ever gotten. So, in a tidal river, say you fish, the Potomac or the James River or the Chickahominy River, or anywhere where there's a good tide fluctuation throughout the day, that last hour to hour and a half of outgoing tide is usually, in my experience, again, I ain't no expert, I'm just talking from my own experience, that last hour and a half of outgoing tide is usually the best of the day. That, for the most part, is the best feeding time of the day. Let's say the last hour and a half of outgoing and maybe the first 30 minutes of incoming. That's where if you've got an area that you can catch fish in, and you know how they position, you want to try to put yourself in that area in that last hour and a half outgoing tide. Because that's when the bait's going to be moving, that's when the bass are going to be moving, and they're going to be feeding, and they're going to be looking to eat anything and everything they can, because that's the easiest time for them to feed, is when all that bait's moving and it's coming by them and it's getting pulled out and sucked out of the creeks and sucked out of the backwater. You see that more in a tidal water situation than you would, say, a normal river. Now, sometimes when it comes to rivers, I know tidal rivers, I don't know what kind of class to put other rivers in. Like, I live on a river system now, close to me, and I ain't gonna lie, it's the toughest place I've ever tried to figure out, especially for a river. I don't know if these fish move a ton and I don't realize how much they're moving. I don't know, because I find areas that I know are good areas that a fish would live and they want to be, but I can catch them there 2 or 3 times, and then you go back when you say fishing a tournament or derby and you wouldn't think there was a fish in that river. So tidal rivers are a little bit easier to predict when the best feeding time should be than, say, just a river that kind of just flows and meanders according to how much rain and how little rain it gets. So that's something to keep in mind too. Rivers can be tricky. Everyone assumes, because a river system does keep the fish most of the time 6 foot of water or less, that makes river fishing a lot easier, and I tend to disagree with that. At times it can be predictable, but at times a river bass will leave you scratching your head. Last thing, and this is kind of a big deal, is always fish isolated cover off the bank. If you see a log jam, if you see a log that's just out in the middle of the main part of the river, if you see a duck blind, if you see a, whatever it may be, a isolated dot somewhere on a stretch of river and there's nothing else around, a patch of pads when there's no other pads around, a little stretch of grass when you don't see any more grass or anything like that, always fish isolated cover and always fish it real thorough in a river, because a big group of bass will hold up on isolated cover in a river. I personally don't have the forward facing sonar, but if you've watched any of the Chowan River MLF tournament, any of the stuff on YouTube some of those guys put out, it was crazy how many of them were fishing the main river. And when I say main river, I don't mean main river shoreline. I mean main river out in the channel where there was one log or two stumps. And they would sit there and just fish those two stumps or that log or an old dock post. Anytime you see any isolated cover in a river, off the bank, if you can get to it, if you're fishing kayak or boat, always fish it, and fish it slow and fish it thorough. Start off with a top water, and then maybe go to a crankbait, and then run something slow by it, but always fish it thorough. So those are 10 things that, in my experiences, in river fishing, 10 things you can do that will help you get more bites, hopefully put more fish in the boat. Again, for the next month or so, I'm gonna keep fishing the rivers. We've had that storm come through, so every river around here is just over the banks. I mean, it's pretty rough out there right now. I haven't looked to see if it's even fishable, but hopefully next week I'll be able to get out there and start fishing again. But I wanted to give you guys these 10 things. If you got any more questions, comments, anything about river fishing, again, I ain't no expert, but a lot of my time fishing in the last 30 years has been in a river. So hopefully this helps. And like I said, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. If you guys got suggestions for content or things you want to see or you want me to talk about, just leave it in the comments below, and I'll, and we can talk about it. We can get a video going about it and hopefully help more people get out there and just catch fish, because that's basically what this is for. So I appreciate you watching. I hope everybody's safe this week and has a good week upcoming, and I will see you guys on the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.